everybody. Before we get going on this presentation, I do have a statement I want to share with you about kinetic infrastructure. I'll throw it up on the screen. And thinking inside the box works, especially when kinetic infrastructure takes everything outside the box and brings it inside. Now, that might be a confusing statement, but in this presentation, I will definitely bring some meaning to that, make it clear, and give it some understanding. As kinetic infrastructure is the building blocks, the new building blocks of infrastructure. Now, thinking about building blocks, it gives me a chance to tell you a short story. And this story tells you where kinetic infrastructure came from. And to start this story, we have to go to the very beginning. And the very beginning is three-tier infrastructure. Now, when I think of three-tier infrastructure, I think of these building blocks. A lot of different shapes, a lot of different sizes, different colors, and that represents compute, storage, and networking. Us IT pros, we gather all this together, we connect it up, and we have a viable business solution. Three-tier infrastructure is here today. It'll be here tomorrow and beyond, despite what many people think of it kind of being phased out. There's use cases for it, so we're going to keep going with three-tier infrastructure. Now, roughly what came next is blade centers. Now, when I think of blade centers, I used to work on the IBM blade centers of old. They were clunky big, they had some shortcomings, their network connectivity wasn't quite what I was looking for, but they did pave the way for converged infrastructure. Now, when I think of converged infrastructure, I think of these two blocks. The red block is compute with a little bit of networking. The yellow block is storage. Now, when us IT pros grab these blocks and put them together, we have a viable solution for business use. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because converged infrastructure, modular, when you think about it, in 2009, Cisco UCS hit the market. Within a very few short years, it took the data center by storm. And when I think of converged infrastructure, I think of Cisco UCS. Now, roughly what came next is hyper-converged infrastructure. So same blocks, same sizes. I gave it a little different color just to denote that there's a little bit of tweaking you can do with those HCI nodes. But typically, when you set up in an HCI cluster, you're using 3 or 4 identical nodes. And when you grow and scale the cluster, you're adding similar nodes or the same nodes. Now, I say similar nodes because there is compute-only nodes and storage-only nodes, and you kind of have a little bit of granularity with growth of that HCI cluster. Now, around the same time or a little before, we also have a lot of public cloud infrastructure coming up. You've got AWS, Azure, GCP, and if you think about HCI and the cloud offerings, I feel, I guess in my opinion, that it had hid the evolution of converged infrastructure into what it is today, kinetic infrastructure. So when I think of kinetic infrastructure, I think of this one unit, this one block, this mega block. And I'm going to call it the mega block because it collapses compute, storage, and networking into one block. 7U block typically, and you can carve it up to almost anything you want it to be. And in this presentation, I will definitely, like I said at the beginning, give some meaning and clarity to that statement, and we'll go through this. Now, I guess I got a little off track, but let's bring it back and get really started on this presentation. Hi, I'm Chris Haight. I'm your CDW Canada Senior Solutions Architect. I'm also a technical account manager at Vancouver, BC. Beautiful Vancouver, BC, which I brought the rain with me. If I tell you, I guess my focus, it's kind of an umbrella term, hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure, but if I was to break that down, I'm really deep in server technology, server platforms, CI, HCI, and obviously three-tier, and then the new kinetic infrastructure. I've also dabbled in storage, networking, security, and public cloud, mostly Azure. But if I grab all these solutions together and bundle them up for my customers, I help them create that hybrid environment, hybrid multi-cloud environment. Now, this presentation, I'm focusing on kinetic infrastructure. I hope to give you a solid understanding of what it is. And with that, we'll go to the agenda. So today's agenda, I'm going to talk about an overview of kinetic infrastructure, really what it is, the defining characteristics of kinetic infrastructure, the why. We'll touch on some use cases. We'll take a closer look at the technology, then we'll touch on a few use cases. Then we'll get to Q&A. If there's time, probably not, but I'll give you a vehicle to reach out to me for questions, suggestions, and comments. We'll get to next steps and then wrap it all up. So with that, what is kinetic infrastructure? So I got to take a step back with that because there's a lot of iterations. So I touched on, well, actually, I think I missed the blade centers. No, I did talk about blade centers and IBM blade centers that I worked on. But the blade centers turned to converged infrastructure. Converged infrastructure went to modular infrastructure. Then modular infrastructure went to disaggregated infrastructure. Then it went to composable. Probably a couple of other names in there, but it did land on kinetic infrastructure where we are today. And if you see this slide here, it's a little busy. It's got a whole bunch of different technologies, different applications. They all can be carved out of this one 7U mega block. Now, for this presentation, I'm going to focus on the two vendors that I know and have been working with for years, Cisco and Dell. They make the two solutions that really fall on the far right hand of the spectrum of kinetic infrastructure. And again, UCS-X, which is the evolved UCS of old, and MX7000, there's the M1000E that you may know from Dell Technologies. Now, to take a glimpse at Cisco UCS, we'll take UCS-X, actually the new version. It's a 7U mega block. You see some blades, some fans, some storage up there. Just give you a quick glimpse of what it looks like. And then if we go and move on to the kinetic infrastructure, you've got, or the Dell Technologies MX7000, you've got your compute storage and everything, which all collapse into that chassis at the end. There are some differences between these two, but definitely if you're looking at the differences of UCS-X versus Dell MX7000, reach out to me, and it's a longer talk for pros and cons and differentiators between the two. Right here, you've seen kind of a quick look at them. Cisco UCS-X has 2 fabrics for networking and other future-facing modules, storage as well. MX7000 has 3 fabrics, which we'll get to in some later slides. So this is the chassis of a UCS-X. It's just a hulk, a metal hunk. You drop your stuff in. And this is where we get into getting into the defining characteristics of kinetic infrastructure. You have a chassis, UCS-X, you slide your stuff in. MX7000, same kind of deal. You have a chassis, you slide your blades, various blades in. There is one more fabric on this one, and again, there's a little more electronics to that, but typically the network fabrics have no mid-plane design. And that's a key thing to talk about because the blades that go in through the front interconnect with the horizontal installed fabrics in the rear through some guide pins, and it removes a bottleneck. It removes a single point of failure, being that no mid-plane design in the fabric. And then it also allows for future expansion or changing out with faster modules or more bandwidth, or something that we may not have now. You can take those modules out and put it back in. So it really helps avoid a forklift upgrade, although we'll see how that goes. So now that we know what is kinetic infrastructure, kind of the defining characteristics, or at least a few, we can talk about why kinetic infrastructure. And really, it gives you a reduced physical footprint in your environment, whether it's a remote site, colo, or your own data center. And what I'm talking about is not just this 7U module or 7U mega block. You're buying less network gear. You don't need external storage. You may not need your SAN or your NAS. Maybe you do need them. But then again, we'll talk about this, but you can carve this into anything you want it to be or not. So easier management of the environment. There's a few slides on this, but both Cisco UCS-X and MX7000 have a streamlined single pane of management of glass. It's leveraging the modern REST API, your Redfish implementation. There's lots of integrations and plugins with a lot of the other management tools you may use, Windows Admin Center, vCenter Server, and they have cross UI launching, which I'll get to that. You can scale virtually, well, I won't say unlimited, but pretty much to the capacities that they can take with each of them. They can scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 chassis. You can carve it out any way you like. And to speak about making your infrastructure anything you want, I kind of carved it out. We'll have some slides on that. And the investment protection, 3 generations, really you're at the beginning of your Cisco UCS-X or your MX7000. Cisco UCS, the original, came out in 2009. It's 2022, and you're seeing end of life. So you're at the beginning of the life cycle of these new mega blocks. Now that we kind of know some whys, let's take a closer look at the technology. Now, here I'm going to lean heavily on the MX7000 side just because it kind of falls more into the full kinetic infrastructure description because everything's collapsed in. One thing to note on the Cisco UCS-X, the fabric interconnects are on the outside of the chassis, and those, you create a couple of trunks, A side and B side, to your top of rack switch or your core. On the MX7000, you would just have your two trunks go to your core or your top of rack switching without needing those fabric interconnects on the outside. We can get into that, probably a deeper chat talk for a later time. Now, going into the granularity of the UCS and the MX7000 chassis, you could carve this up. The first two blades could be your traditional VMware ESXi hypervisor. The next two blades could be, I don't know, carve them up containers. Maybe you want to kick your tires on Red Hat or SUSE Rancher. Maybe, sled 5 and 6, you want to do some storage. Maybe not. Maybe you want to take all the last 4 blades, 5 to 8, and you want to say try HCI. Maybe you want to do Microsoft Stack HCI and bring it in. Maybe you want to do a VMware vSAN implementation, but you can actually carve those out for HCI. Moving around to the rear of the chassis, this is where we have the 3 fabrics. Typically, the first fabric is your network I/O, your network fabric, but it can also be traditional networking, so layer 2 or layer 3 switching. With MX7000, you have the B fabric, which can actually be another fabric, again, or traditional networking, or you can do GPU modules in there. We'll get to that. And then there's also a fabric C, which is only available on the MX7000, which can be SAS implementation or fiber channel redundant switches to bring in your existing investment in storage. Then you've got your management modules at the bottom, which are redundant. And again, speaking to the management, one type of management is all built in there. I'll get to that. So again, multi-chassis. MX7000 has the concept of lead and backup chassis. You drop another chassis in, so chassis 3, 4, 5, 6 onwards will cable up to the fabric on the lead and backup chassis, and you also have rack redundancy, where with the UCS-X, you'll be cabling your chassis into that fabric interconnect, and not a little different there. Again, later chat, more stuff. Quick example of just the integration of Open Manage Enterprise Modular in the management modules, as well as they talk to the iDRAC, which is your KVM, all integrated, one VIP, just one user management interface. This is what it kind of looks like, nice clean HTML5. And exclusive to the MX7000 as well, we have augmented reality. So if you get a ticket coming in saying you have a bad power supply, your tech at the data center, colo, remote site can take their phone over there, point it at the MX7000, and they'll know that that bottom power supply is bad. They know it's going to replace really quick, making your life a little bit easier. Now, talking about those GPU modules, that's another difference between the two, and I can get into a deeper talk if you're trying to lean heavy on GPU, but the core modules on the MX7000 go in the back, enabling GPU T4s, 2 of them to each of the blades in the front. Let's get into a few use cases. So data center consolidation and refresh. Again, if you want to, you're refreshing your old infrastructure and you want to bring it down to something a little more easy to deal with, it's a 7U mega block. You can easily carve it up, like I said, anything you really want it to be or not. You can, I talked about dense virtual environments with containers. Again, carve it up to whatever you want. Reduce your network gear, reduce your storage gear, less vendors, less support and maintenance contracts. Again, you can carve out HCI. You can carve database applications, bare metal if you need them. Containers, again, there's probably a lot of use cases you can think of, more than I can. But if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, I would say in the Q&A section, fire me off an email. And if you have your phones ready, you can actually hit the QR code up there. They'll pre-populate a pre-canned email with my email address. You can put your question, your comment, your suggestion in there and fire it off. If we get into, say, some next steps, we can explore Kinetic infrastructure. I got a few links here. Again, if you want to scan that or send me an email, I'll fire off the links to you. Reach out for further questions and comments, and as well, if you talk to your account executive, we can set up a session for a topic of interest that you want to get deeper in. Now we kind of got all this stuff that we'll wrap it up because we are definitely running out of time. And before I say thank you, I've got a couple shameless plugs here. One of them is, that is not Buzz Lightyear. That's me if I joined Star Command. That's Chris Lightyear. And I just love Toy Story, and I'm a fan of Pixar animation. And there you go. And Lightyear's out in theaters June 17th. So hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I should actually say CDW plays in the media and entertainment space. So if you've never seen that, I would Google CDW Studio Cloud. We actually have a render farm offering for studios. Really cool. I love playing in the media and entertainment space. Other than that, my last shameful plug is I like Kinetic infrastructure so much that I got certified on the whole Power Edge line all the way down to being an implementation engineer for Power Edge MX. It helps with these talks with the customers, getting deep, and it prepares CDW for these future mega blocks. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time, your attendance, your attention, and have a great day rest of your conference. Thank you very much.